Good morning, boys and girls. It is time for the Piggly, Wiggly, and Squiggly show. And today's adventure is called Batten Down the Hatches. Now, you boys and girls don't know what that means, but that's an old pirate term back in the olden days. And that meant that everybody, there was a storm coming, and they better go down and close everything down and tie themselves down so that they could be safe. So, Mommy Piggy had been keeping track in the newspaper and on the TV about this hurricane that might be coming. And so she got some candles, and she got some oil for the oil lamps, and she made sure that the puzzles were already out and the games were out and the deck of cards was out. And so she told Piggly, Wiggly, and Squiggly this morning when they were having breakfast, she says, now you know, you've heard of hurricanes and you know what they are. Hurricanes are a whole bunch of wind that just blows and blows all over. Sometimes the trees fall down and sometimes they don't fall down. And we get a lot of rain. And Piggly says, oh, I remember last year, Mommy. And she said, yes, that was Hurricane Herman. And it rained and rained and rained for 2 days. Remember, our yard was full of water? That's right, we had fishes swimming in our front yard. And Mommy Piggy said yes, and then when the water went down, the fishes went away, and we could all go outside. Yes, we remember that. And Wiggly says, oh, that was so much fun. Are we going to do it again this year? And Mommy Piggy says, we may be doing it this year. She said, so I want you boys to play close to home so that you can hear my bell if I ring to you. Because if I ring the bell, that means we got to start getting everything out and, get ready for the hurricane. And so they said, okay. So they played in the front yard and, excuse me, the alligator came over and Patty Pig came over. Sally Skunk came over, and finally Little Bad Wolf come over, and they were all kind of worried about maybe Hurricane Cedric was going to come and pay them a visit. So they didn't play too long, and they went home, and Mr. Farmer Brown had already told Little Bad Wolf, now you come over here when the hurricane comes. I want you to be safe, and you come over here with me and Mrs. Farmer Brown. So Little Bad Wolf, first time in his whole life, didn't have to spend a hurricane in a tree bushy thingy that leaked water and be by himself. And he was so happy. He says, oh, Mr. Farmer Brown, thank you so very much. Thank you. I can't wait till the hurricane comes. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, now, we don't want the hurricane to come because it might do some damage. Now, we just want you to make sure that you're safe and that you can come over here. Okay. Well, hello, Tracy. Nice to see you. Anyway, so, sure enough, Mommy rang that bell and brought them inside, and Piggly Wiggly says, what are we going to do now? And Squiggly says, I know what we're going to do. I bet we're going to have supper early in case the lights go off, and then we're going to play games. Well, hello, Casey. And so then they had supper, and Mommy had fixed a whole bunch of things that if the lights went off and the electricity went off, well, then she had food already prepared that wouldn't spoil, and they had plenty of food. So they ate their supper, and it was about 5 o'clock now. and it started to rain, and it started to thunder. Oh, it was so, in the woods, it was so nice that the rain would come down, and they had so many trees all around them that the rain was just kind of pitter patter, but it was really raining hard. It was raining thump, 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 that hard. Well, pretty soon, electricity went off. You're right. And they heard a tree fall. But thank goodness it was way in the backyard, so they didn't have to worry. And Mommy Piggy had already checked the trees, and she knew that she had already got the limbs off the tree that weren't so very good and strong. So she had already got all those limbs off all the trees around their house. So she wasn't too worried about anything doing damage on her house. Well, she got out the games, and they all played a game. And then they decided, well, they had to light the candles, and they lit the kerosene lamps, the oil lamps. Oh, they were so pretty. And Mommy Piggy says, do you know what, piggies? My grandmother used to study her schoolwork with one of these oil lamps because they didn't have electricity. They didn't have electricity? And she says, no, sweetheart. She says there was many, 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 many years before electricity was invented. And so people, they went to bed early when it got dark, and they got up when it got daylight. And the oil lamps was the only thing they had. Oh, Mommy, really? And she said, yes, that was your grandmother, your great-grandmother. That's how she lived. Oh, wow. And so now they got a puzzle out, and they put the puzzle together, and they went to bed. But Mommy let them all sleep on a pallet downstairs in the living room. And she got in her recliner, and they went fast asleep. And it was still raining, but GrandMommy could hear, Mommy Piggy could hear a little bit of wind coming. And she says, oh, okay. And she prayed and she prayed, and she says, oh, dear Lord, she says, don't let our house get all damaged up. Amen. So she went to sleep. And the rain and the wind, the noise, just kind of made everybody so sleepy, and they all slept so safe and sound, and they had a really good night. The next morning at daylight, excuse me, at daylight, they woke up and they peeked out the windows, and it wasn't raining. And Mommy says, well, now that's the hurricane turning around. So we can go out for about a half hour. We'll know when to come back in. So they all went outside, and they looked around, and thank goodness, Mommy Pig's prayer must have worked, because there wasn't any damage in their yard, and everything looked so pretty. Well, about that time, about that time, Mommy Piggy heard some wind, and she goes, okay, you got them, you got to go back inside now, because I think the hurricane's coming back around. So they went inside, and sure enough, that hurricane started back up again. Hurricane Cedric was really a stink pot. Hurricane Cedric had been all over the ocean off of Florida, and he finally decided to come up on the land, and he picked where Piggly and Wiggly and Squiggly lived, that area. He picked to come up. Well, it got kind of breezy, and it got really loud, and Mommy Piggy says, let's play cards. And so she taught him how to play rummy. And rummy's such a fun game for little boys and girls. And they knew how to play rummy. And so they played to 500 points. Oh, that takes a long time for little children to make 500 points. They did it in about an hour. And so they said, okay, what do we do now? And Mommy Piggy says, well, let's finish some of our puzzles. And she put out a puzzle for each one of them on the table. She had a great big round table. And she put a puzzle in front of Piggly, and a puzzle in front of Wiggly, and a puzzle in front of Squiggly. And then she sat across the table and she had a puzzle. Oh my goodness gracious sakes. Those boys, they worked on that puzzle and they got about halfway through and she says, I think it's time for lunch, don't you? And so she gave out the lunch. She made sandwiches and she had some fruit cocktail. And oh, they had such a good lunch. They got through their lunch and they go back to the table and it was still raining and the wind was still blowing. Oh my goodness gracious, they couldn't even see out the window. It was raining so hard. And they went back to their puzzle and they found a piece and they found a piece and they started working on each other's puzzles. So pretty soon, Piggly had finished his puzzle. So he went to help Squiggly and Wiggly. And pretty soon, Wiggly had finished his puzzle. So they went over to Squiggly. And pretty soon, Squiggly finished his puzzle. Now they all got around Mommy Piggy's chair. You know what happened? She finished her puzzle. She says, that was a little fast, boys. She says, we're going to have to slow down on these puzzles here now. Well, they decided to take a nap because there was nothing else to do. They couldn't go outside and play. Well, meanwhile, over to Mr. Farmer Brown's house, Little Bad Wolf was feeling so happy because he had somebody to talk to while the hurricane was on. He didn't have to be all by himself and scared. And he used to be, and he was so thankful that Mr. Farmer Brown and Mrs. Farmer Brown said, you come over here and you stay with us. He had a great big supper last night and a great big breakfast this morning because Mr. Farmer Brown had a generator in his barn and he had electricity. Whew! Nobody else in the forest had electricity. Sally Skunk's mommy didn't have electricity. The alligator's mommy and daddy didn't have electricity. Frankie Fox didn't have electricity. And Allie the otter didn't have electricity. Nobody had electricity in the woods. Mr. Farmer Brown did. So Little Bad Wolf says, you know what, Mr. Farmer Brown? He said, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because you taught me to be truthful. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, yes, I did teach you to be truthful. What's on your mind? And Little Bad Wolf says, you got that great big barn out there and we've got electricity. He said, if we have another hurricane, can we invite the boys and girls that I play with and their mommies and their daddies over to stay in the barn? He says, I bet you there's enough room. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, you know what? That's a nice idea. Let me see what Mrs. Farmer Brown has to say. Mrs. Farmer Brown, sweetheart, would you come in here, please, in the living room? Mrs. Farmer Brown was doing the dishes, and so she put down the dish rag, and she come into the living room, and she says, what is it, Mr. Farmer Brown, darling? What do you want? And he says, well, Mrs. Farmer Brown, honey, he said, I think that Little Bad Wolf had a real good idea. If we have another hurricane, I think we should invite the boys and girls and their mamas and their daddies to come and stay in our barn. We can partition it off so everybody will have a privacy, and it would be nice because we've got the generator. Mr. Farmer Brown, sweetheart, why didn't we think of that before? Little Bad Wolf, you're such a sweet little boy to think of that. Think of your boys, your friends, your boys and your girls and their parents. Oh my gracious sakes. Little Bad Wolf, you are so sweet. And Little Bad Wolf smiled and he says, I know I am. Well, about that time now, it was about 5 o'clock. And so Mama Piggy woke the boys up and she said, it's time to eat now. Well, the rain had stopped a little bit and the wind had stopped a little bit, but it wasn't over quite yet. And so they ate their supper and they lit the oil lamps and they lit the candles and they played a game of cards. They played rummy one more time because Mommy Piggy knew that by the time they would get through playing, 500 rummy, that it would be bedtime. It'd be past bedtime because it'd be real dark. And she had a feeling. She had an old portable radio that didn't need electricity. It took batteries. It was real old. And she had tuned into that radio and she could just barely hear the station. And they said something about crackle, pop, 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 pop. Hurricane Cedric is going to be pop, 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 pop. And she knew that it was either going to be over or it was going to be gone or both. Might be gone so far that it was over with. Or it just might be over with because it just went and stopped, which isn't very likely. So they played 500 rummy, and this time Piggly won. And so they went to bed, and they went to bed down on their pallets down in the living room. And everybody was snoring, and Miss Mommy Piggy was praying, oh, please let the hurricane be gone. Thank you, dear God. Amen. And she went to sleep. Well, they woke up the next morning. There was no rain. It wasn't even sprinkling. And they looked out in the yard. The yard was a little bit messed up. Some twigs had fell, and the wind had brought in some things. If you don't put away your outdoor furniture, they're going to fly through the air. And sure enough, they recognized the chair from Sally Skunk's yard. She forgot to put it away. So they said, can we go bring back the chair to Sally Skunk? And Mommy Piggy says, let's make sure that everything is all over with, that the hurricane is all over. And right then the lights came back on. Oh my goodness gracious sakes. So she turns on the TV, and sure enough, the man on the TV said, this is George Jones, the weatherman, and I bring you the news from the Hurricane Cedric. And everybody listened real closely, and he says, Hurricane Cedric has gone on up north. We are no longer in the midst of the hurricane. Oh, everybody was so happy. The little piggies just danced in circles around their mommy, and they just were so happy. Now they could go outside. 2 days they've been inside that house, and now they could go outside. So they went outside, and they looked around, and they found some more things that they needed to take back to different people. So they got their wagon out, and they put everything in the wagon. And they went to Sally Skunk's house, and they said, Sally Skunk, here's the chair that you forgot to bring in. Oh, she says, thank you so much, Piggly, Wiggly, and Squiggly. I remembered that that chair was outside, and my mama wouldn't let me go out and get it because she's afraid I'd blow away. And she would have, too. That's how bad the wind was. She says, thank you for bringing back my chair. And they said, okay, we got to go deliver some more stuff. So they went to Frankie Fox's house. And there was a whole bag of clothespins. Their mommy had brought in everything else, and she forgot about her bag of clothespins on the clothesline. She said, little piggies, did that blow over in your yard? And they said, yes, ma'am, and we had to pick up all these clothespins because they were all over the yard. Oh, she says, I am so sorry. That's okay, Mrs. Fox, that's okay. We brought them back to you. And then they went down to the lady down the road. They didn't really remember her name, but they know they had mowed her yard, and she was so nice. She was the one that gave them the lemonade and the oatmeal raisin cookies. And they said, I think this belongs to you because we remember seeing it in your yard when we mowed your yard. Oh, she said, where did you find this? And they said, well, it kind of blew in our yard. Oh, she says, three little piggies. She said, you're such a sweet young man. She says, I just think you guys are just really wonderful. So, the last thing they brought was, you know who, was Mr. Farmer Brown's yard. And he said, what are you boys doing here with your wagon? Hey, what's that? That's my wheelbarrow. Do you mean I left my wheelbarrow outside in the storm? And the three little piggies says, yes, you did. Where'd you find my wheelbarrow? Well, when we left the lady down the street that we mowed our grass for, and she gave us, you know, the one that gave us the lemonade and the oatmeal raisin cookies, what is her name? And Mr. Farmer Brown says, I think that's old Widow Jones. Okay, well, Widow Jones, when we left her house, we found your wheelbarrow. GrandMommy forgot what they found. So we got to bring it back to you. And about that time, Little Bad Wolf comes out the door. And he says, Mr. Farmer Brown, did you tell the boys what we thought of? And Mr. Farmer Brown says, no, but he says, you can tell them. And Little Bad Wolf says, do you know what we're going to do? Do you know what we're going to do? The next hurricane that we have, everybody is going to be invited to Mr. Farmer Brown's barn. And we're going to put up sheets to have rooms so everybody can have their own room. And everybody can stay with us. And we have a generator. And we got electricity. Well, the three little piggies, they were so surprised and they were so excited. And they went home and they told Mama Piggy, and she goes, oh my goodness gracious, isn't that sweet of Mr. Farmer Brown? Well, boys and girls, we hope that there won't be any more hurricanes to go through the woods, because Piggly and Wiggly and Squiggly, they were pretty brave, but they were a little bit scared too. So we'll have to see if they have another hurricane and what's going to happen. But for today, bye-bye. See you again at 10 o'clock Wednesday. All right. Bye-bye, boys and girls.